Hello everybody, welcome. We're going to pick up from last night. And got a bunch of legacy headlines I found weekend and this week that I think are very important. And, oh yeah, James Lucid has cracked 12,000 subscribers. Congratulations to James, my goodness. That's epic. And we're going to play, that was amazing video and song last night. This one is really good too, folks. He's got so much. How do you just pick a few, see? And Yellow Cake Mule, I'm going to play that song right now. Not a very long song. Because I'm a bit late getting sorted out. And I'll be right back.
Outside Tucumcari, rental truck, paint strip, tires close to failing. Driver says it's a moving job. It's clearly not. One-day contract to cross the state line, latch draws. No household goods inside, drums stacked to the ceiling, plastic torn, heavy powder exposed. Yellow cake baby, yellow cake mule, interstate haul, not cocaine, not meth, not street contraband. Powder for the core, driven in daylight, truck rolls west, nothing stops it. Libya, 2011, concrete yard, barrels left in rows, 1,000 tons in storage, fence pulled down. Inspectors went in, counted drum by drum, 10 were missing, 5 were found outside, abandoned in the open, left without a guard, not contraband, wages measured in uranium, loaded at night, routes not reported, hidden hand, fuel cycle sustains, AIA looks away, police say nothing, wrong kind of crime, freight moves west, looks like moving day, yellow cake mule, interstate haul, not cocaine, not meth, not street contraband, powder for the core, driven in daylight, truck rolls west, nothing stops it. Truck keeps moving, highway takes it in, no mercy, no break, only yellow cake mule, yellow cake mule, yellow cake mule.
But I'm telling you something now. That man's got talent, period. And he's worked for it on top of it. Long days and long nights to get to this point. I got a pretty important poll for you tonight. Should nuclear power plants be declared a menacing, imminent threat to the ability of water to sustain life? And you've heard me talk about this a lot over the years, where I can make a pretty good argument, a very convincing argument, in a courtroom or on the Senate floor, that the nuclear industry's entire ideology is to attack water, and by proxy then you kill every species. Let me do a little recap. This is March the 15th, day 4. You have 4 reactors in a row destroyed. Well, number 2 hasn't blown up, I don't think, on the... It was on the 15th, but I don't know if it was when this picture was extracted. This was about a year and a half later. They had stripped down reactor 3 and 4. Reactor 4 is behind me. These are actually 190-story buildings, 65 meters, 190-foot buildings. These are huge buildings. They're 150 feet wide. So it's very difficult when you're looking at that to appreciate, you're talking about 150 feet wide, half the length of a football field. We have a lot of different isotopes documented. And the numbers that they're documented at are something we've never, there's no paper, no X studies suggesting of these numbers pre-Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. 1 million atoms per square meter is just catastrophic in Canada, United States. A Canadian study of 20 million particles. These are incredible numbers. And remember, anthropogenic man-made isotopes have a particular property. And so they're not going to be called iodine-131 unless they pulse energy almost at the speed of light every second, which is catastrophic to everything with replicating cells. And so per liter, you're talking about 20 million atoms of iodine-131. There's 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-133, 31 times more iodine-129. This was independently backed up by a study from Ottawa, Canada. And 220 million atoms per liter are just it's just unprecedented contamination of, and this is permanent, this is forever. 15 million year half-life, there's 10 half-lives, so that's 150 million years. So you have multiple different isotopes acknowledged by different, and so you got to add 2 more onto that one, and then the 131, so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different isotopes. The yellow sections you see were 2 years ago in 2023. So imagine that, you see Kono's house up there? The red is a nuclear wasteland, and they're able to go into the nuclear wasteland because the industry is literally insane, and get into the yellow zone. They got to go in their home, they got to stay in their home, they can't come outdoors, they can't open the windows, they can't stay there for very long, right? But they done that to trick you into thinking that there was a population in that area, when the reality of it was these were people who eventually are going to get sick and die from those exposures. And these zones here were considered some of the nuclear wastelands no-go zones. Fudabar, Nami, for instance, Lydia. They manipulated, deceived, and coerced people into going back into that area. Interestingly, like Fudabar is one side of the plan, Okuma is the other side of the plan. Yet most of Okuma you can see is white. So what they're trying to say is the plume just went that distance, and that's where the radiation contamination was. Right? That's simply, as the isotopes I just showed you in Canada, United States, clearly show that wasn't true. The industry has unbelievable amount of influence. This is a professor of nuclear quantum engineering, Young Jong Il. Science outweighs irrational reasoning. Now, he's the head of the Department of Nuclear Quantum Engineering at CAS, which is South Korea's most prestigious institution. So he's sanctioned by the South Korean government, in other words, to come out and do what he's done. He's claiming that there was 1.37 million tons of water and that there was only 2.2 grams of tritium. And that if you dumped it all in the ocean at the one time, it'd be equal to 3 grams of sugar, a sugar cube that weighs 3 grams. So a sugar cube that weighs 3 grams is all that got out of these buildings. Does that resonate for you? Does that make any sense? So the fact that someone like that is able to come out and make those assertions when they're completely, ludicrously, unscientifically, they're blatant lies. It's not illegal to lie about nuclear. It's illegal to lie about a lot of other things in industries, but it's not illegal to lie about the poison from a nuclear power plant. And the fact that they do it is really something. The doses coming out of the ground in 10 places, or 6 places, was at 3 times the lethal dose, 10 sieverts an hour. 3 sieverts or so is a lethal dose. It'll melt your organs in a few minutes. 10 sieverts, and so you probably didn't notice it, but that's the plume on the site. And let me start it off again. So the video is a real video. It's multiplied by 40 or something, the speed, because it was compressed, right, to get up on YouTube. And then I compressed it too, right? So at 10 sieverts is 6 places coming out of the ground. It's not splashing out of the ground. Does that look like a splashing? Steam splashed out from somewhere? That's not splashing, okay? That's a visible plume because the conditions were right. The water filtration facility, 2013, they had just started it. In the late 2014, they were hoping to have it operational. That's 4 years later. There's not 1,000 tanks, there's actually only 750 if you count the little tiny ones. The plume covered the whole planet in all the studies in less than 30 days. The whole planet with catastrophic numbers. And when you look at the documentation, then you know that there wasn't a nuclear scientist on the entire planet that looked at that and said the fuel pools and the reactor cores were intact. There wasn't a single nuclear scientist, academic, university, et cetera, which means you got a pretty rotten industry. It's not pretty rotten, it's rotten right to the very core, and it's corrupted your medias and your universities in order to exist. And it has to poison every species on the planet to continue to exist. And because this kind of poison is permanent, we're very concerned. And we're also concerned because you poison all the water. So should nuclear power plants be declared a menacing imminent threat to the ability of water to sustain life, should it be considered an extinction event because that's its attribute? Its attribute is it can exist, but nothing else can. And it could take 100 years, and we're at year 80, but it's going to get its own way. All the whales are emaciated worldwide. Japan admits another case of withholding reliable, important information from the public. The radiation levels were far in excess of the emergency limits. In less than 8 hours, residents in some of the most affected areas have already exceeded the average amount that a citizen would expect to receive in a whole year. The stuff you get in a whole, so-called get in a year, which is a manipulation of facts in order to lull you into complacency to accept man-made radiation poisoning. So man-made radiation can poison you. Natural radiation, you have to have it to function. It's not radiation in any comparison, shape, or form of man-made. And the reason we call it man-made, like nuclear stuff is man-made, is because we don't have an autoimmune trigger or any species on the planet or anything with replicating cells to defend against it. And so ultimately what that means is you're going to exterminate every species. from the many attributes of gammas, neutrons, betas, alphas, X-rays, and the ability to exist in everything. And when you look at the studies, just let me give you a couple of examples of it, because it's hard to appreciate how much they know about nuclear. I'm going to give you an absurd amount, but we're just going to flash through it. And so I'm going to just take you through something, and I want you to appreciate what they study. What is it that they study? So I'm not going to try to, and what I want you to think about is they studied every creature, every cell, every biota, every microscopic animal, every large animal, and with radiation poisoning. There's nothing they haven't studied. And so just want you to scan this while you think about how much they actually do know. They know everything about it. And they're not doing these studies because it's harmless or innocuous or benign. They're doing these studies because it has terrible attributes. No matter what in radiation-induced, a lot of this is ionizing radiation-induced damage. That's what these studies were all based upon. And different things that they have studied to quantify that assertion. Radiation-induced bone loss. Think about the birds and think about the animals and think about induced cell damage through this. They know every facet of radioactive fallout, and radioactive fallout is brutal. And to prove it's brutal, I'm showing you these studies. So hopefully it gives you a little bit of insight of why I am like I am, and why I talk the way I talk, and why I'm at this so often, and why I look at when I do field studies, and literally every time I go outdoors, I'm doing a field study, but we go target species. It's because we're looking at everything else at the same time. And because I know that they studied every creature, every plant, every flower, the millions of microscopic creatures, the biotas, bacteria and fungus gets destroyed, which is where the biota hangs out. And they're aware of that. This is why they have done all these studies. And it's hard to comprehend how many studies they've done. There's 4.3 million just in North America every year, paid for by the taxpayers. And so when you see that list of people there, appreciate that that's how they pay their mortgages. They pay for their children's sports lessons and music lessons, and for vacations in their summer homes and their ski resorts and their worldwide cruises on ships. They study you like you're a rat and everything around you, and they deny that it has any harmful effect, despite the fact the studies tells a completely different story. And these studies were paid for by you, but you don't get access to them. And because the industry is so corrupt, it has corrupted everything in proxy. They have studied everything about man-made radiation, and man-made radiation showed up. That's when the cancer epidemic started in the early 70s, and then it got worse. So did heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory and pituitary, and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism and diabetes. Have you seen them exploding post-Fukushima? Ask your hairdresser the next time. And because we've been covering this for so long, and the idea is for policymakers and investors and people that are curious about this or worried about it, have at least one person out there that's honest. And I'm funded by you. I exist because of you. In fact, I would have been homeless 2 months ago if it wasn't for you, because the industry hates me so much they managed to get rid of my pension. And we got that sorted out, and by the end of this month, still a long ways away, I'll finally be safe again. But what a dirty thing they done to me to try to get rid of me. And they would have won if it wasn't for you folks out there, you incredible, amazing, beautiful people out there. They know everything about radiation. There's nothing they don't know about it. And if you watch my Chernobyl presentations, on this site. Look up Chernobyl anniversary videos. You'll see a couple of them are really long, and they have all studies like this. And if you watch both of them, you don't need to listen to it. You just watch both of them. It's good to listen to it, don't get me wrong. But if you just watch and take screen captures of all of this stuff, you'll understand why I say they know everything about man-made radiation and its harmful effects. They know everything. And they know a lot more than they're telling you, because every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, and every farm is poisoned. Every load of food coming out of there has the ability to reach people far, far away from a nuclear plant fallout zone, heavy fallout zone. The radiation never stops emitting from a nuclear power plant fuel pools, which is terrifying. And you've never heard any media, any pundits, Ernie Gunnison or Helen Caldicott or Christopher Busby or the rest of the scum, acknowledge that the reason fuel pools are actually dangerous is not so much because of their toxicity, their energy, because they're underwater in a special type of water, but because they're still splitting atoms for millions of years. So every day the fuel pools are poisoning your entire planet. And there's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. What do you think is going to happen? And each fuel pool, so they know everything about it. There's nothing they don't know. And it's not like they've just done one study on each subject. Half the studies every year are man-made nuclear radiation. And the amount of people that they make their living, you see all these people in that study? It's hard to comprehend it, how much they actually know. They know more about man-made elements than they do about the stuff from the solar system. New lawsuit filed against Sendai nuclear power plant. More than 100 NAMI residents died during Fukushima evacuation. 100 people. They didn't die from evacuation. We've seen many millions of people evacuate from typhoons and cyclones and hurricanes. Supercell typhoons, supercell post-Fukushima, right? Everything's a supercell now. And this is just 23 days of radioactive fallout from Fukushima. Reactor 3 actually ejected around 8 or 9 reactor cores right out of the building, including the running reactor core. But the official story is only 2 grams got out, right? And never really got out. It's in 1,000 tanks. Nothing got out. That's the official story is nothing got out of these buildings. Nothing got out of those buildings. That's the official story. That this never even happened. As of August the 24th, 2023, United Nations, working hand in hand with Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and China, have come out, because the biggest population on the planet is the Asian community, which is over 6 billion. And so they use tritium to manipulate that population and to make them complacent. It's every university works at that. Every media on the planet works at that. Very effective, right? But it's unconscionable that they're doing something like that. Rice farming is almost sacred in rural Japan, and the government protects farmers with tight restrictions on imports. The government protects farmers with tight restrictions on imports. Many farmers are too close to the nuclear disaster to return to the fields, but others have gotten the go-ahead, even with the risk their harvest may end up being too radiated to ship. If it's too radiated to ship, it's too radiated to grow, and it's too radioactive for them to be in that particular environment. This is 2012, May 2012. For their rice to be sold, it will have to be tested, every grain of it. It's not true. They had given the farmers handmade, safe cast Geiger counters that are considered garbage. And they were told that take the rice from before the meltdown and mix it in with rice that is too radioactive on those crappy Geiger counters, and then you can sell it. The farmer has no idea what a Geiger counter is, and Geiger counters are very finicky little things. Like if you turn it, Geiger counter got multiple settings, right? So if you typically want it on the counts per minute and you set it to the energy, like microsieverts or millisieverts or something, then you have to walk away from it, turn it off and walk away from it, and leave it there for about 30 seconds to make sure that and get it on the right setting when you turn it on, because otherwise it won't function. If you go from setting to setting, you're not going to get an accurate reading. That was typically considered. And that if you expose it to a lot of radiation, it's no longer functional. You have to take it and send it to the factory, but they might not want it because it's so radioactive. And then if it's not, then they can recalibrate it. And they'll send it back to you, right? That's an inspector up there. It cost me $600 to do it to that one. Which was, I would have been better off putting the rest of the money and getting a new one, basically. Back in the day, right? And yet another sad reminder, how the March 11, 2011 disaster in Japan continues to claim victims. A 62-year-old evacuee from Fukushima made a brief visit to his radiation-contaminated home, walked into his shuttered shop, and then never left it. And after his wife reported him missing, officers and volunteer firefighters in the town of Nami, and I showed you Nami a little earlier, is 7 kilometers away from the ongoing, never-ending nuclear meltdowns, organized a search, and the following day firefighters found him and then brought him home for his family so they can bury him. The people of Nami are increasingly depressed about the future. Well, in reality, the whole planet should be, because the nuclear industry now has sentenced us to a terrible fate. We don't have a clear future or see any achievable targets. And he knew, but most of these people are very brainwashed, they're very complacent. He said he knew of 4 or 5 people in Nami who had passed away early at their own hands, and more than 100 would have died of illnesses during the evacuation. Nami was a small town. And so zero possibility 100 people had such debilitating illnesses that they died during the evacuation. The reason they evacuated Nami because they didn't want people dead in their homes and no way to explain it on a radioactive fallout. And they waited too long to evacuate them, so they died shortly after. That's why they have evacuation zones, is because imagine coming in there a few days later and finding 1,000 people dead. Well, it's not the tsunami never got there, the earthquake never damaged it. It only leaves radioactive fallout, and that would be the death of the industry worldwide immediately. It's a death plume, and it would have. That's why they evacuate people from such a distance. Japan halts review of a national policy, nuclear policy, after a draft report scandal. 2012, May 29th. The Japan Atomic Energy Commission decided to suspend a review of the country's nuclear policy guidelines currently being conducted by an expert panel after some of the panelists expressed concern over the selection of some of the panel, which included members from power companies and research institutes that are promoting nuclear power. And this was a typical ploy to use. Most of the people on the safety boards are only there for one reason, is because they're the worst humans this industry has produced. And I'm going to give you an example of that. And we're going to talk about Kathleen Higley. She's giving a speech with a whole bunch of other unsavory academics. We're a small group, and you should cherish those. She's talking to journalists are in the audience, and that's TEPCO's cheerleader lapdog. That's Kyle Vetter. The guy in the middle is the one-armed bandit, Miles O'Brien, from PBS, who lost his arm suspiciously at Fukushima and showed up in a different country and had his arm amputated. Most likely he was hiding a memory card, and they chopped his arm off in order to get him to talk. The woman in the creature in the white dress is a former NRC. The creature stood up there at the National Press Club is Kathleen Higley. Dr. Kathleen Higley, we've covered her numerous times. Terrible, unbelievable, horrific example of a human. She should be in a wax museum of horror, and she should be in jail. She's going to explain to you there's basically 100 people that makes the decisions for your schools, your hospitals, your community, and they're on all the different boards, the IAEA, ERPA, UNSCLEAR, the IAEA, etc., and they're the same people. And these are evil people. I'll be right back.
When I was trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented. The ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and ERPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. ERPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own US NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these will bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known. It's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees. So it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas, and that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP are on UNSCEAR, they're in ERPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the US organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people, a lot of gray-haired 100 people. And most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of ERPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club. And we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us. So,
and what she meant by that was you should cherish us, you should just regurgitate anything we say and don't use anything else. These are journalists, they're laughing about it. They're laughing because that's why they're there. She's telling him we're the top dogs and what we say go. And you're the medias, you're the New York Times, you're ABC, you're PBS, you're CBC, you're BBC. It says it's so corrupt that they don't even hide it. But it's such a candid moment. That whole lecture, that whole public relations lecture, the entire lecture is full of these monsters. These are monsters. Kyle Vetter is a monster, right? And it's the same people on each one. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations is United Nations. ERPA is United Nations. UNSCLEAR is United Nations. The International Commission on Radiation Protection is United Nations. The IAEA is United Nations. And the same people on them are on the NCRP, or Pan America Health, on All the nuclear committees out there. It's not stacked, it's rigged. Reporters Without Borders blast TEPCO in Japan over unacceptable restrictions on freelance journalism. May 24, 2012. Although some photographers and camera operators will be present, neither of the two freelancers will be allowed to use still cameras or video equipment. Why couldn't you bring your own cameras to Fukushima as a journalist, if you're an actual journalist? And we got so many stories exactly like that, and if you do, you have to give the memory card to TEPCO, so-called, or the guys with the tattoos, and then they'll delete anything they don't like and let you keep the rest. Miles O'Brien wouldn't give up one of his memory cards, and they chopped one of his arms off before he finally gave up that information. He disappeared for a week. Nobody knew where. Can you imagine this? A journalist disappears for a week after visiting Fukushima site. Shows up in another country with an arm missing and no explanation. A country that wasn't on his schedule, that it wasn't on itinerary, that he didn't have tickets for flight there. There was no. He went and bought the tickets, flew there, and they surgically fixed his arm. He stayed in the hospital in ICU for several weeks. So he was in pretty bad shape, with no explanation ever of how he lost his arm. None of your business. Well, yes, it is, actually. They were looking for some leverage. He was supposed to steal the documentation that they can then blackmail TEPCO. And TEPCO has a bunch of tattoo guys that will do the dirty work. Not that people with tattoos should be put in that category, but we're talking about the Yakuza. Although some photographers and camera operators will be present, neither of the two freelancers, the freelancers weren't allowed to have still cameras or videos equipment because they weren't part of the Japanese university developed building plaster made with zellulite to absorb cesium. This is a building plaster. There was two applications. One was when they stored the radiation, they would have a container which would retain a lot of the radiation allegedly. Right? One unresolved problem with the Fukushima disaster is the radioactive particles contamination worldwide. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags just in Fukushima Prefecture. Imagine how bad the rest of the planet got it. I mean, the industry, it's just absurd. Where it's growing food right alongside of one-ton bags of radiation in the nuclear wasteland. Does that make any sense? Right? Does it? And by the way, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which she was talking about, all those, the International Committee on Radiation Protection, ICRP, ONSCLEAR, IRPA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. The International Atomic Energy Agency says public trust is key to projects using radioactive soil from the nuclear wasteland. This was 2023, by the way, this story. What was interesting was we have the many stories where they'll put a disclaimer. The International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulator and not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil recycling project, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Ms. Clark said, noting that the group's task is to make sure Japan's plan is in line with their safety standards of disposal of radioactive waste. But why would we be using their safety standards when they're not a regulator, right? And they're not able to compel or inflict a penalty upon anybody that doesn't take their advice. So it's just a voice, rather. It's not a regulator, and it's not in a position to judge. So they're not a legitimate organization. But all the media is there treating them as a legitimate organization in that video I showed you earlier. So this is severe corruption. So this means you have nobody to turn to. This industry has corrupted all of your checks and balances. And you're in real trouble. One unresolved problem with the Fukushima contamination worldwide. The group says the material could be used to safely store debris in soil contaminated by radiation by preventing radioactive substances from seeping out. But think about how they framed that story. They called the story plaster, a building plaster. So were they planning on building homes with zeolite to absorb cesium? And how can it only be cesium? How can you only have cesium radiation? Well, you can't. May the 14th, 2012. All of these stories so far were May the 14th, or May rather. From May the 14th to May the 30th. I'm kind of going backwards. Cesium levels in rats near Fukushima. Well, that's the first year. Ain't no rats there anymore. They stopped reproducing, right? Found to apparently rise in proportions to concentrations of atmospheric radiation. Rise in proportion to concentrations of atmospheric radiation. The releases. So they reported 3,100 atoms of cesium. So a becquerel is a pulse of energy. It's an explosion in every direction from a physical atom. And so the consensus on a becquerel is you can't have a becquerel without an atom. And at the top of my screen up there, you can see the numbers. So that's the pulses of energy. And they measure cesium, but that doesn't mean, just because they measure cesium doesn't mean gammas, neutrons, and alphas are not their pulsing energy. And it can't just be cesium as a gamma. Iodines are gammas. Not all of them, but not all cesiums are gammas either. Not all curiums or betas or alphas or neutrons. So 3,100 atoms of cesium per kilogram in rats captured near a village 30 kilometers from the plant compared to 790 atoms per kilo, which was found in rats 70 kilometers away. Well, this was just an observation. The numbers in Tokyo for certain isotopes were 500 trillion per kilogram. NHK, which, all your water is contaminated worldwide. And water can't sustain life and radiation at the same time. So life has to go, because radiation is not. NHK reports that over 3,100 becquerels of cesium per kilogram was detected in rats captured near Kawachi village, which is 30 kilometers from the plant compared to 790 per kilogram 100 kilometers away. But we can show you the different realities of all of this. But how can you just have cesium? By the way, for every cesium, which we're talking about 137, there's 100 times more strontium-90. So cesium goes into the muscles, the organs, the glands, and strontium-90 goes into the bones. So cesium goes also into your thyroid gland. It's not just iodine 131. There's any gammas can end up in your thyroid gland because it mimics the iodine, right? 131 is a typical one most people are familiar with. But the numbers we're talking about was enough to saturate the thyroid glands of every species, which means you saturated the skeletons of every species too. So you're producing radioactive hormones forever for every species, which means you're going to exterminate the species because they're going to stop reproducing. And even worse, again, you're producing radioactive stem cells for the developing fetuses of every species in humans, which means the majority of them are going to be wiped out before they can reach maturity because they have an inferior chance of surviving because of the contamination. And as I showed you earlier, they studied every facet of radioactive fallout. They studied every facet of the ecosystem by using man-made radiation's adverse effects. So this is a incredible revelation for anybody that's concerned about man-made radiation, anthropogenic man-made radiation. They've studied everything. They know it's lethal to everything with replicating cells. There's nothing with replicating cells has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. If that doesn't worry you, then I feel bad. This is not a game. This is not a perhaps. This is not a maybe. This is not an opinion or a conjecture. This is not a theoretical equation. This is a blatant, horrific fact. And what I'm telling you should be treated as the utmost emergency and your priorities, because you have to protect yourself from this and everybody else in every species that might survive what they already got done to us, which is highly unlikely. On April the 23rd, 2012, the editorial board of the Washington Post proclaimed that the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan was non-catastrophic. The editorial board of the Washington Post, a very influential media in North America and Canada, proclaimed that the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan was non-catastrophic. That's April 23rd. April 23rd, all the fuel pools and reactor cores have already detonated, and each reactor core was probably equal to 100 Chernobyl. The media has a horrific legacy of pretending that Fukushima didn't happen.
My understanding is on top of what you...
Like all of these journalists, this is only a fraction of it, pretending they're at the top of reactor 4 in Japan, of a nuclear meltdown, and everything is perfect. All the media done this to you. All the universities promoted that. All the schools allowed that to happen. All the academics of all the other disciplines sat in silence. Well, not necessarily the first couple of years, man. We did have dissenting voices because they didn't have control over the narrative. They just bought up all the media since then. Now they control everything. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. The writers eagerly promoted nuclear power while omitting inconvenient deal breakers such as cost, waste, safety, health risks, human rights, or facts. They refused to put facts into their stories. Is that what you call a journalist? So did you ever ask yourself, why does a journalist, can he live in a five-bedroom house with 5 bathrooms and a 3-car garage and go on vacations and their children are into all the sports and music and go to the Ivy League school? How can they afford that by writing a couple of paragraphs a week? Well, because they're willing to trade your lives for their monetary. And that should make you cry, that people like that the system rewards people like that to the point where they go to universities, get incredible amount of degrees in order to get a job to come out and lie to you. That's a thing. It's a big thing too. At least 100,000 children every year are graduating college with those attributes. That should terrify you. That should give you a moment to really consider how you're going to have a future. Civil Group finds high levels of radiation up to 20 millisieverts per year at the Japanese school after restrictions were lifted. They're only looking for gamma. They're not looking for betas. They're not looking for alphas. They're not looking for neutrons. They're not looking for X-rays. And the question is, why not? And why are you measuring it in millisieverts for? Each millisievert is 1,000 microsieverts. There's 20,000 microsieverts. Each microsievert has a minimum of 750 atoms. That's the best way to look at it. So 20,000 by 750 atoms. Let me bring up the calculator. The weapon of choice. So you're talking about 20,000 microsieverts. I'm going to multiply it by 750 atoms. And then so in that same sample, we're talking about a sample, right? So 15 million atoms each child is exposed to. And so if an atom gets in your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. At the same time, your body, and does that with white blood cells, which displaces a red blood cell. For every white blood cell you're displacing a red blood cell, the red blood cell carry oxygen and nutrition. And so they're going to retain a lot of these atoms in their body. They're going to breathe it in. They're going to be drinking it. They're going to rub it in their eyes. There's many different ways. You can go in through the skin. And every atom, ultimately, your body is going to attack it and build a sarcophagus around it. We call that a tumor. But at the same time, each atom, every one of these atoms individually are going to pulse energy in every direction, almost at the speed of light, like an explosion. It's going to destroy chromosomes and cells and DNA. And your body can't keep up with that every second. Imagine 1 million or 2 million or 3 million of these man-made atoms in your body. So now you're producing so many white blood cells, your immune system is compromised severely. And the same thing for birds or mammals or animals. And birds, then a flu could take them out. The flu would never hurt them. For millions of generations, they lived in harmonies with those typical pathogens and viruses. But now, because their immune system is so compromised from the bioaccumulation, their body is under siege trying to repair the damage and unable to attack a simple virus or a pathogen. The pathogen and virus, lumped on top of the fact that their immune system is compromised and under siege because they're producing more white blood cells than oxygen and red blood cells, nutrition cells. And that's what's happening to me and you and all the whales. And not only that, should nuclear power plants be declared a menacing, imminent threat to the ability of water to sustain life? So you can't incinerate an atom and kill it, destroy its properties. It's here forever. Even when it decays down to radioactive lead, it's still anthropogenic man-made radioactive lead that still can damage chromosomes, DNA, and cells. It never goes away. The academic community who lied to you about every other facet of it will tell you that that point is harmless. There is nothing that industry will tell you is the truth. And so in water, it can't be destroyed by being in water, and it destroys all the life in the water. And the life can't come back. A typical glass of ocean water right now would be dirty because of all the microscopic animals, all the eggs and larvae and all the sperm, the milk from all the species. They release their genetics into the ocean, and the ocean mixes it together and produces the next generation of species. You go down and look at your ocean right now, it's clean water, it's dead water. Clean water is dead water. There should be 1 billion creatures per glass of water. And 75 to 100 million of them should be the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain. We, the nuclear industry rather, is attacking your water, fresh and salt water, and has now succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Or maybe it was just a plan from the beginning. Whatever it is, you need to get your butts in gear. We're in real trouble. And the academic community has no doubt about the effects of radiation, as I showed you earlier. Right? They know everything about it. This is not an opinion. They know everything about it. So these children are in nuclear wastelands. They're going to be producing permanent radioactive hormones and permanent radioactive stem cells. Recently, a Japanese civic group said the radiation hotspots were recorded outside 26 schools in the Fukushima prefecture. So this group was using inferior equipment, but still was able to show, and they were using the wrong terminology, but they're still able to show the horror of this industry. You know, the strangest, like there are certain things that stand out in my life. It's impossible for me to think that the blogging community doesn't know who I am. And so I find it very offensive that they've never defended me. Because particularly since I'm a very honest person and I run an educational program, and all the nasty stuff they're saying about me are simply incomparable with the reality. The results of those tests showed at least 14 elementary schools, 7 junior high schools, and 5 nursery schools had hot spots. Like these hot spots are not the proper. You can't just have hot spots. The whole area is a hot spot, the whole community. If you got a hot spot in your community from radioactive fallout, your community is a hot spot. It's everywhere. Your inferior equipment can't detect it, see? And that's not an accident. When the new academic year began in April, the Education Board lifted a restriction The students play in schoolyards for less than 3 hours per day in the wake of a nuclear disaster last year. So in April of 2012, was it? Let me check the date. May 2012. When the new academic year began in April, the Education Board lifted a restriction. Wrap your mind around what I'm saying here. That students play in schoolyards for less than 3 hours per day because of the radioactive fallout. Well, a lot of parents never let them in for 2 years. They were the good ones. Well, they should have moved them out of there, but they couldn't afford to, or they would have been gone, like a lot of them went. There's over 1 million people left Japan when it happened. And they didn't go back. A lot of them were families of the nuclear industry. When the new academic year began in April, and the government, of course, left the country, never went back, the Education Board lifted a restriction that students play in schoolyards for less than 3 hours per day because of radioactive fallout. The civic group told a press conference there are many spots in schools where radiation levels still remain high, calling on the Education Board to restore the restrictions. Well, get your kids out of there. Why wouldn't you get your kids out of there? Yellow cake baby. TEPCO admits May the 8th, at least one underage subcontractor worked at the Fukushima Daiichi in April 2011. At least one. We have many, many documentations of it happening many times. TEPCO announced that a 17-year-old boy was working in Fukushima in April 2011. Exactly 1 month later. A violation of the nation's labor standards laws. No, that's called murder. According to TEPCO, the boy engaged in work to create a hole in the outer wall of Unit 2 turbine building. It's ground zero, for goodness sakes. And the turbine building of 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are all connected together. I'll point it out to you, I suppose. See that long building right there on the ocean side of reactor 4, 3, 2, and 1? That first building is reactor 3 and 4. The next building is reactor 1 and 2. That was infiltrated by the missile, the projectiles from the explosions. The pressure explosions. These weren't hydrogen explosions. These were pressure explosions. These were completely predictable because you need 1 million gallons a minute of water to keep it cool, or the pressure builds up. It's already at 1,000 pounds per square inch. It's at enormous temperatures. And so as the temperature rises up, as the pressure rises, then you have an explosion from pressure. It's like just keep pumping air into your tire till it explodes. That's what happened to Fukushima reactors. These weren't hydrogen at all. And we know that because we have the videos of the explosion. You're not seeing the flame. You're not seeing the hydrogen produces an incredible flame, right? It's very explosive. That's why they're going to use it as an alternative to gasoline and diesel. And we didn't see the explosion. And now we know the reactors exploded from a pressurized explosion because it's evident right in the pictures. The explosion was from the reactor itself exploded out. And that's where the damage went straight down all sides of it and above it. With reactor 3, for instance, right? It was reported he received a nearly 2 millisievert radiation dose during his time spent working at TEPCO. How can you work right alongside of 4 reactor buildings melted down and blown up and ejected the fuel all over the site and the ocean, and 8 fuel pools with approximately a total of 36 reactor cores, massive reactor cores detonating? How can you only get 2 millisieverts? The buildings, the turbine building can't protect you, even if nothing was already over there. But that whole area was littered with it. And if you look at the original footage on April, and if you can go back to my videos, where there's 1,900 pictures, we covered them over a 1-week period. And you can look at the videos of a recent one from this anniversary this year, 736 mystery pictures. And I'm the only person on the planet who's ever covered those pictures, unfortunately, horrifically. And allegedly they had thousands of people on that site. It's impossible to know where he was actually to. And it's impossible to have thousands of people on that site. When you look at the pictures, you're going to say, well, there wasn't thousands of people there. You can't work at a nuclear meltdown. And all of these examples of people that were there, allegedly, are always the most vulnerable of society, the victims of society, and the homeless and the destitute. Not academics, not scientists, not accredited nuclear institutions or universities or something like that. People who know nothing about nuclear. That is the only people we've ever seen there. It is reported that he had received 2 millisievert radiation dose. It's absurd to suggest that's all he got. It's absurd. It's a blatant, horrific lie. It had also been developing new heavy construction machines which are remotely operated as much as debris waiting to be removed is highly radioactive or located in high radiation areas. There's parts of that site they still don't have control over. These are just serial killers, the best way to describe them, and enemies of humanity and the 8 million species. Operators are allowed to work without a mask or other protective clothing in the operation room, which are just the back of trucks, where dose rates are about 5 microsieverts per hour. People who write these stories should be in jail for the rest of their lives because these are crimes. New Zealand scientists voiced concern over the most unusual event in 20 years of studies. This is just 13 months later. The mutton birds, which we call them sooty shearwater, I think they are, or shearwater. No, sooty shearwater because of their color. They look like soot, right? The soot color. It wasn't a derogatory term. They run on the water. You see his feet, how they're positioned like he's running, and they'll I'm used to seeing millions of them in the migratory route. Scientists in New Zealand are voicing concerns, beyond the ocean, working, and have millions of them. They're landing on your boat everywhere. They're stealing fish off your line. Scientists in New Zealand voicing concern after monitoring the mutton bird population, the sooty shearwaters, as it traveled back from spending the northern summer in Japan. So after Fukushima, the mutton birds, when their next migratory run, they had some really weird stuff going on with these birds that got noticed right away. The birds returned to New Zealand. Now in Canada, they had put a restriction on all academics, scientists, were not allowed to do interviews unless they went through the Prime Minister's, Stephen Harper's Prime Minister office first, and then they would get a list of the journalists, whoever had to be a journalist from accredited medias, to interview. If they agreed to it, the government, the journalists would get a list of questions, and the scientists would get a list of answers. And I recently, about a week or two ago, I had put together a folder just on that only. And that's sitting on my desktop out there. And I'm just trying to come up with the right circumstance to tell that story, right? But the folder itself would be much like tonight, where I can just sit there and go through like a presentation on it. The birds return to New Zealand every November to mate, but the Department of Conservation Research, Graham Taylor, said the birds that did return were in poor condition. So they normally return every November, millions of them. In 2005, scientists attached tracking devices to a portion of the bird population. The New Zealand mutton birders, when they leave here, when they go past here on the migratory route, they were called sooty shearwaters. When they get to New Zealand, they're called mutton birds. The New Zealand mutton birders have concerned that ever since the Fukushima plant started leaking radiation, and they probably heard the word leaking from these scumbags pretending that they're on top of the building to your left.
Privacy.
And there was hundreds of them that made those assertions. Do you think the building to your left is leaking, or do you think it's gone? It's really unconscionable to call it leaking. The birds return to New Zealand every November to mate, but the Department of Conservation researcher Graham Taylor said the birds that did return were in poor conditions. We don't know if they died up there in the North Pacific in British Columbia. Now, I was out there. I don't know if I was out there that year. No, that was 2012. So I went up there a couple of years later and spent 6 years doing research expeditions. And these are my pictures to your right. There was around 7,000 highly visible species. And so like there was, in the 70s of starfish, each species of starfish came in multiple vibrant colors. And they would all be touching each other, and mussels, they would be the gooseneck barnacles, the shellfish, the clams. There was around 80 species of sponges. They all came in multiple colors. There was almost 80 species I lost my brain thought there. 80 species of sponges, almost sea anemones. You see the brown circles there, the sea anemones. There was incredible diversity of shellfish. There was clams and little necks and razorbacks and manila clams. There was geoduck clams, oysters, scallops, abalones. There was all the periwinkles. There was all kinds of different types of clams, shellfish. There was all kinds of... And any rock that wasn't covered in something else was covered in mussels. And the coastline was stripped. There was all kinds of coral. There was highly visible... Typically, you can never go ashore because of the sea urchins. And it's just this... So that when the birds were going along the northern Pacific, the food to your left, they can supplement their diet. There was 700 algae, 480 species of worms. And the 700 algae was 5,500 invertebrates without the backbones, like little shrimp. So there's incredible diversity there. And so we don't know if they're up in the North Pacific, died up there in the North Pacific. Yeah, they starved to death. There was a million common murres starved to death at the same time, or over the next couple of years. And they are deep divers. They dive 600 feet all day. They feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill, which is like a big shrimp. And so they, small fish, right? At the same time, there was 1.4 million of Cassini auklets, which were migrating to the same spot as the mutton birds. And they were microscopic feeders. They eat the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, the eggs, larvae of many species that I showed you. Like these species on the shoreline, they milk into the ocean itself. So the ocean at that time of the year is very murky. You can't see jack. During the summertime, if you look in the ocean and it's crystal clear, it's a dead ocean. That's what you're looking at. We don't know if they died up there in the North Pacific yet. Well, now you do. I've done research expeditions from Vancouver to British Columbia to Alaska for 4 to 5 months or longer each year without coming home. And I wanted to see if the species recovered, because they disappeared, and we wanted to see if they recovered. So we had to go back for 5 extra years. And that first year, I always felt that I would find an oasis. And an oasis that's what it looked like in 2011, to your left. So in 2011, to your left, I was looking for that. I was looking for an oasis that looks like that. All I found was a stripped coastline. Now, what would happen if I plowed in a healthy coastline, like over to your left? If I took a bulldozer or a backhoe and I dug up all of that and I put it in the back of a truck and the truck drove it all away, and I'd done that whole coastline, the species from down deeper on both sides would just fill in the gap, and then the soup of life itself would have reseeded the entire coastline immediately. Unfortunately, as you can see, even from here, this picture, despite the fact that it's never a good picture, you can see the ocean is crystal clear, which means you got a dead ocean. And so when we talk about should nuclear power plants be declared a menacing, imminent threat to the ability of water to sustain life, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about first-hand experience because I spent 6 years doing research expeditions in the hope that the species might start to recover, and they didn't. And this is not just the Pacific, unfortunately. We see this now. It's symmetrical worldwide. And if you go down in my videos for the last, all species of whales are emaciated. Why are species and whales emaciated? Whales, insects, birds, post-Fukushima radioactive fallout. The death of whales, insects, birds, whales, birds, insects going extinct. Radioactive shrimp was all about the radioactive death of the oceans. Causing mass species extinction event worldwide, Fukushima radioactive fallout. Dead and emaciated whales. I've done all of those videos in a row in the last 2 weeks in order to try to help you appreciate the horror of what we're talking about, that nuclear power plants, period, should be declared a menacing, imminent threat to the ability of water to sustain life. And life includes you, your children, your friends, your families, birds, insects, mammals. Nothing on this planet exists without water. And we have tritiated, minimum, all the water on the planet now. And we have 1,000 fuel pools that'll guarantee it. There's no way to recover. So imagine you got the windows of your room wide open and all this fresh air is blowing in. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful thing. And then that night, your car is too close and you leave one window open. That car's exhaust is right by the window. And you got, heavens forbid, you got your loved ones in that room sleeping, their children, they're very vulnerable. And that car is running all night long and the gas is running into the room. That would never happen, right? Because you know better. But nuclear is the exact same thing, and the room we're talking about now is your planet. And Fukushima has now attacked your planet. And you are in real trouble, and you need to get it together, and you need to start organizing, and you need to start holding these people accountable. You need to litigate them, and you need to find somebody like me that is willing to go after this industry. I know the world will never pick me, but they'll pick somebody else who don't know what they're doing. Most likely Greenpeace or Arnie Gunnison or Helen Caldicott, or somebody who's already proved they're willing to sell you out in every species on the planet. They'll get the job, not me. Not somebody who's willing to do the work. Not somebody who has a long history and legacy of work, of endless amount of work I've done to try to educate this population and the academic communities who, unfortunately, already know everything I'm telling them and way so much more. Remember those studies I showed you earlier? All of them, they know everything about man-made nuclear, and they know there is no safe nuclear of any type whatsoever. There's nothing safe. There is no acceptable limits. It attacks everything with replicating cells. Taylor said the research exhibited such a significant drop in the numbers of sooty shearwaters, muttonbirds, he admitted it was the most unusual event in 20 years of studies he's been doing. Adding the conditions of muttonbirds suggested they did not get food in the North Pacific they usually do. They didn't get the food because Fukushima wiped out their source, because they can supplement their diet to your left in the tidal zone, see? There were 700 algae with 5,500 known invertebrates without the backbones like little shrimps. So they could have fed whatever they wanted. There was endless amount of food. At the high tide line was 20,000 insects. There's a 19-foot tide exchange on that coastline. That's where the muttonbirds passed through. And I've done the whole coastline from Vancouver, British Columbia, right to Alaska. And there's 27,000 islands. And I took my time and meandered through all of it in desperation to find life. And it never came back. Truly one of the most saddest things I've ever done. One of the most loneliest things I've ever done. He said many of the birds which arrived back had old feathers on their tails, wings, and bodies. Had old feathers. He said, I've never seen birds in that poor of a condition come back to New Zealand in his 20 years of working with a big budget. U.S. researchers have requested samples of dead mutton birds, sooty shearwaters, which were found off the coast of New Zealand so they can be analysed with the expectation that some of them will absorb some levels of cesium, because apparently only cesium exists after Fukushima. You should have nothing but contempt for anybody that regurgitates that narrative, because how can you be a journalist and not know the reactors don't run on cesium, and that the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is actually curium isotopes. Curium isotopes need more lead shielding, 20 times thicker, like 2 inches, than plutonium does. That some of them will have absorbed some level of cesium. Jamaica revealed information about contamination on used cars from Japan. So did Russia, quite a coincidence. And they're still rejected. Radioactive cars, I'd be terrified to buy anything from Japan. Violent releases of materials at Fukushima Daiichi, January 7, 2013. Violent releases. So 2 years later, they had a eruption at that site. On January 7th, 10:15 in the morning, enormous billowing cloud of black smoke erupted from the ground, from the China Syndrome, of the nuclear power complex and headed south down the coastline. The winds were blowing south. But look at that plume. And I showed you a video of that earlier, actually, right? And the video I showed you was they abandoned the site. Let me go back and show it to you. It's just a little blurb. I wait for my computer to catch my system, I should say. My system that I use is a very specific system. It's just for doing it. This is the same system they use at all the media. So it's called a TriCaster. And it's dedicated I can't even put a browser on this thing, right? You can't do nothing with it, only these types of presentations and editing and stuff like that, of course. So the plume, that's the video. Let me play that again. It's just a short part of it. Well, actually, let me go find the video. I happen to know where it's to, unfortunately. And the reason I frame it that way is because it's unfortunate. It really is. So the so-called steam was at 10 sieverts an hour in 6 places. There you go, I'll find it now. I got it here somewhere. Oh, there you go. What's the odds of that? Let me come down here for a second. And so, before I do that, let me just flash, because a lot of people are probably just joining the show. I was talking about these studies earlier where they know everything about radiation. This is, if you've been around at all, you know I got an absurd amount of this stuff. But they know everything about man-made radiation fallout. They know everything. All of these studies are about ionizing radiation damage. And these are stuff me and you most likely have never conceived or considered or have a hard time comprehending. They've studied every facet. This is just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent of what I got. They know everything about radiation. There's nothing they don't know. They know it attacks water, and water feeds every species, and by proxy now you take out every species. And that it's no accident that you've never heard of it unless you came here. It's no accident. Every academic knows these things. This is the basic of the academic nuclear industry. They all know this. This is first year stuff for them. They all know it. And by proxy now they can't tell their families because they've told them it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine and climbing mountains for so long. They can't just change the story. And there seems to be this weird cult thing going on when you get into the industry, you're there for life. And consider the plume to your right is the French government, based upon based on 23 days of radioactive fallout covers the whole planet. We have many different studies showing the same thing. That was the French government, one of 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. This is, so this was the same speed from YouTube's site, TEPCO's website. And you see the plume starting off. This is 2 years later, right? And so this has happened before, quite a few times before, by the way. But this one got posted, I guess, accidentally. And the date is up there is, as far as I know, well, this is a different one, I guess. It looks the same, though, don't it? But all the cameras never moved, right? So I'm just going to speed it up for a second until you can see the plume. You'll start to see the plume now. There, look at that. So I'll go back. So this plume, as is playing out right now, this will take over. If you're anywhere in that plume, you're dead. Now, everything that plume touches is going to be lethal doses a year later still, years later still. So everything that is coating is permanent study. See those towers? It's 25 sieverts at the bottom of those towers today. They're lethal doses. You can't get near it. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. 25 is. Now this plume this is a death plume. So they evacuated the site, and they've done this many times, by the way. These are lethal doses. So now you just contaminated the whole site. So just imagine if this happened, there was no meltdown, and then this plume shows up. Well, that site now is off limit to humans. And this is why, well, there's a lot of people died in that plume. They just don't want to admit it. But the evidence is there. Let me see. Let me show you something. These stories break my heart, by the way. I don't think the people realize you don't become immune to this, the nightmare of this stuff. $16,000 people quit their jobs there. These were the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and immigrants who don't speak the language. Because there was all these people would have died. There's lots of people who, like, these people don't know what they're doing at a nuclear site. A lot of them don't even know it's a nuclear site. A lot of people don't even know it's Fukushima. A lot of these very vulnerable people that are working there. Concerns rising at Fukushima. 16,000 workers have quit severe working conditions. Well, what could be severe? What could cause people to run away? That people were dropping dead, see? Consider that only inhaling a single atom will kill you eventually. You put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. So think of in your living room, it's a beautiful summer's day, you cleaned your house. The whole house is sparkles. You go in your living room, you sit on your couch, the curtain is open, the sun is going down over the horizon, it's shining right in through your window, and you see this beam of sunlight. And when you look at it, you notice that the beam is full of fine particles. Right? You've seen that thousands of times, right? Just a single one of those particles is smaller than the particle we're talking about here. Will eventually kill you, because it's in your body attacks it, eventually builds a tumor around it. They admit there's a cover-up. They're not. They know there was a cover-up. Like there was the curium system that can't filter. How can you filter a Seri system and the ELP system? How can you filter different particles? The curium and the Seri were meant to filter just cesium-137 because that's the bullshit story they fed you your whole life. And so this was meant to reassure you. And where the curium system is too is right alongside of the common spent fuel pool in reactor 4, an actual nuclear wasteland. that can't filter. You can't, like, they got 1,000 different isotopes. So uranium, plutonium, americium, many different uraniums, many different plutoniums, americium, plutonium, strontiums, etc. How can you filter out at a cesium-130, like a cesium-137 of 1,000 different isotopes? Because that's what they're talking about. That's what Siri means. That's what Curian systems are. And then the idea is, well, we got all the cesium, so don't worry, good job, right? Because the average population is so incapable of comprehending the enormity of what the lie is, it just can't be a lie. They can't accept that that's a lie. 2 sieverts an hour of beta radiation emitted from a single liter of the leaked water from the tank. So the tank is multiple millions of sieverts, because they're only talking about beta, for goodness sakes. So when you take that out of there and allegedly filtered it, the filter got millions of sieverts. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose, even if there's multiple lead shields there. A tank with millions of sieverts, and you can't do it because you're going to have gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas in the same tank. Those particulates will settle on the bottom. You'll have a chain reaction because that's the recipe for a criticality. Like the original Enrico Fermi criticality, it was a pile outside under the bleachers of football stands, right? And they just pushed the elements together with a big long stick and caused a criticality, and that was how they justified the rest of the industry, right? They were like, this works, so here we go. Now, in the bottom of the tank, you would have the elixir, the combination of madness. You could never build another tank alongside of it. You could never run a hose from it because you could never go near the hose. You could never connect the hose because that's a lethal dose just getting close. If there was a hose already connected, you have to worry, you're just 100 kilometers from the tectonic plates. You know another big earthquake is coming. You know another tsunami is coming. And you know that if these tanks were full of this kind of material, which is what they're saying, because it leaked, the alleged leaked water, was a water leak in the vicinity. It means that the tanks are empty. And we know that if you look at last night's presentation, you know what I'm saying is true. And that those people stood up there in their paper suits would be dead right then and there because those tanks need to be 6 feet thick lead to even conceive that it could somehow magically protect you from the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the alpha shines, the gamma shines, the X-rays. That whole site is a Bromson-Lung effect. Bromson-Lung is when you got gammas and alphas, neutrons, and betas pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. Cesium-137 will pulse energy 600 feet every second. If it hits a gammas, alphas, another neutron or neutron betas or an alpha, they don't mingle. They'll hit each other and change directions. One at speed, almost at the speed of light, another one almost at the speed of light. It's incredible energy, and it does that for millions of years as it goes through all the decay chains. When they hit each other, they clap. And that's called an X-ray. The German discovered call it and I'll butcher the name because I don't speak German, a Bromson-Lung effect. Which is, we call it an X-ray. So all the species in your forests, in your meadows, and you and your communities, everything on the planet, in the ocean, everywhere else, are getting full-body X-rays from 80 years of emission from the nuclear industry. That is quite horrific. Taiwan referendum to reopen the nuclear plant fails. So they just had a referendum to reopen a closed nuclear plant in Taiwan because the ruling party went on a policy of won the majority of the seats by going on a platform of they're going to dismantle the nuclear industry and become a nuclear-free land. So they just had a referendum. Now they just announced they're removing all restrictions on food from the rest of Japan. They already removed it from Fukushima and surrounding prefectures several years ago in 2022. And just recently, a few days back, they announced they're going to remove it from Tokyo and 4 surrounding prefectures around Tokyo. So they removed the restrictions from the nuclear meltdown first and the rest of the country later. It's the opposite of what you would do. It's not corruption, it's genocide and omnicide, what you're talking about. This makes Pol Pot and Mao and everybody else look insignificant. The nuclear industry surpasses evil by many orders of magnitude. And it's easy to suggest that there's a demonic entity involved in the nuclear industry. That nuclear is the result of a demonic entity. This is a technology that should never existed. And currently we're watching sites like BitChute, for instance, and Instagram. You see a lot of the pushed narratives as 5G is causing the die-offs, not the nuclear industry, when it's absolutely the opposite. They do work in tandem with each other. They do enhance each other synergistically. And we have studies from years ago that I've covered of how man-made isotopes could be excited beyond their normal excitement by frequency. And that they were aware of that frequency and were able to demonstrate it. So if you all the species with radiation in them could be severely enhanced to be harmful, the harmfulness of it can be enhanced by a frequency. And I suspect that's what 5G is doing. And I have done entire presentations of studies, academic studies, on cell phones, for instance, of the damage that they cause. It's like the cell phone towers, we got all kinds of studies of how plants won't grow on or tree limbs won't grow on one side of a tree that's close facing cell phone towers, for instance, and how the insects would be deformed within an acre or of these towers, for instance. Plants won't even grow there. But we know now, because we have the 4Gs, now the 5Gs with their range, are at the wrong frequency to be useful to us, to be. There's no such thing as a harmless frequency, but there is a such thing as a dangerous frequency. And that seems to be, if you look at the instructions for a cell phone, is microscopic, right? Even if you got a magnifying glass, you won't be able to read it. And it's not very clear either. So even if you take a picture and expand it, it's still very difficult. But you'll find it on their sites if you look really hard, because they won't have it readily available to you for cell phones. Is don't ever hold that thing alongside your head. And then they have the documentation of what it does to your brain, how it heats up your brain. Say in 20 minutes, your whole brain becomes active, and not in a good way at all. And the same thing with the wireless headphones. Unfortunately, we have the studies that show they're just horrifyingly bad for you, and they didn't need to be. Like I have a wireless set, but I can't wear them no more, because once I went through all the documentation, like shit, I was loving those things, eh? A referendum in Taiwan aimed at reopening the Maanshan nuclear power plant failed to meet the required legal threshold. But they won't have a referendum for the food, because the last time they had it, we covered it extensively. I used to think it was 2018, but now I think it was 2020. We covered it for like 6 days straight for the referendum for importing food from the nuclear wasteland. And 74% of the country showed up. 28% showed up for the vote and knocked it down. But when it came to the food, 74% of the country showed up and voted. And they voted no to food from the nuclear wasteland. So now they just removed the restrictions. And that started 2 years later, because the referendum was only good for 2 years for food from a nuclear wasteland in Japan, Fukushima Prefecture in particular, who never stopped growing 1 billion pounds of rice a year. And he shipped it to Canada, because Canada was the only country that moved all restrictions after 90 days. There was 55 of the major countries put a ban on the food from 14 prefectures, half the country, because these were big prefectures, for a decade. Canada removed all restrictions. So Canada now is flooding the country with invaders, the immigrants, won't speak the language, don't speak the language, but are there to replace everybody who's died or getting sick because they ate the food from a nuclear wasteland that was purposely fed to them. Because the nuclear industry in Canada is brutal. It's the brutal control over our universities, our media, and our governments, right back from the inception of the nuclear industry and the Manhattan Project. A referendum in Taiwan aimed at reopening the nuclear power plant failed to meet the required legal thresholds. Despite a majority vote, the legal requirement was unmet, keeping the plant closed. So the population conspired not to even go there. And the pro-nuclear was very funded. The anti-nuclear literally didn't exist. The pro-nuclear community was in subways, at bus, in all the hallways of the malls. They were at the universities, old age homes. They dominated, but yet the vote failed. And so what Taiwan decided to do in 2022, 2 years later, the next administration, was just remove restrictions, no more referendums. 74% of the country voted against it 2 years before that. So that's to help with referendum. But the industry knew the only way they could even dream of getting a nuclear plant open was to have a referendum. And so they went and tried it and they failed. But they won't have a referendum to remove the food. And Taiwan has a despicable history. It's despicable. Orchid Island is a native, where they shoved all the natives to them. And what they decided to do was they went out to the natives. This was early on too, right? Quite a long time ago. And he said to the natives they want to build a canning factory for canning salmon and canning food, right? Canning crab meat and stuff like this. And that everybody in the communities would get a stipend, like a check each month. I think it was like $1,000 or something. And to an impoverished community that has been ostracized from their homeland, which was Taiwan itself, the island, right? Thought this was great. Yes, sure, we don't have to do nothing, or right, they can have. There were certain other jobs for support showed up in the communities, and some of them were getting jobs that were getting 2 paychecks now when they had no income whatsoever. So they got addicted to that pretty quick, right? You know, if you got 5 kids and the parents, you got $5,000 coming in a month, which is absurd amount of money for an impoverished community. And they built a nuclear dump there. And for years and years and years, the community thought it was a canning factory for canning salmon and canning crab and stuff like that. It wasn't, though. It was a nuclear dump. If that's not despicable, what actually is, I wonder? And destroyed the health of everybody on the island, so the money they were making every month they had to spend on healthcare to try to survive and keep their loved ones alive. And then when Fukushima happened, there was 2,100 students, university nuclear students, alumni, the nuclear power plant employees, spammed the internet and challenged, not challenged, but put propaganda in all the comment sections where people were actively talking about Fukushima. They would show up, and they would show up 10, 20, 30, 40 people strong, 100 strong if that's what it took, to dominate the conversation that was like a banana and a potato chip, and walking in the sunshine, and climbing mountains. And that was evident in my original live streams back in the day. I used to get 6, 7, 8, 900 comments before the show would start, and almost all of them were pro-nuclear. It was an amazing effort. And I let it go on for a number of years, and then I finally decided I was going to put an end to it. At the same time as we were doing the research expeditions, when I was doing the research expeditions and I was coming ashore and showing these results, well, originally I had 3 people on the ocean. I wasn't doing it myself. I still wasn't healthy enough. I just spent a decade in a hospital bed recovering from a diving accident. And I was just getting around. That's when I first started walking without, it was 10 years in a hospital bed and a wheelchair, and then it was another number of years in a wheelchair to learn to walk again. And so what I done was I done research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska year after year, after year after year. And what we discovered was the species were missing. This wasn't an opinion. Now, I approached this many different ways. It was relentless. It would stay on the ocean 4 or 5 months at a time when they were coming home. And it was never always good. It wasn't always good weather. It was typically nasty weather. It was typically terrible weather. And so the species were gone. The species to your left are exterminated. And that's why we went back year after year, because the species to your left, which sustain, right, the migratory species, there's this incredible diversity of insects and mammals and animals and everything else dependent upon the migratory species. Going into the tide zones, right, the species had incredible diversity to supplement their migratory. And after years and years and years of going up that coastline, the species to your left didn't recover. At one point, there was a very candid story came out where you see all these species to your left. The media came out with this one story, and it was spread far and wide. I was on the ocean 1/3 of the year each year for 6 years. Bodies are swollen by cancerous tumors, an unprecedented mutation allowing cancer to spread from one species to another species, to another species, to another species, to another species, to another species. And that's why they all disappeared. That's why it looks like that. And that was a really interesting statement, because cancer never existed in these species before. And suggesting that cancer was the culprit, then where did the cancer come from? They said it was a mutation. But the one thing we know was the coast was covered with radioactive fallout. Another thing we know, they lied about every facet of it. So when people talk about the ocean, when you go up and search in Pacific Ocean and Fukushima, you look at that picture over there, which is the tsunami from NOAA. This depiction here is the radioactive dispersion in the ocean only of NOAA. That was hit away. So they fed you the tsunami, take hope. The Fukushima disaster map is fake. So why didn't they show you the real one, which NOAA had both of them, right? And it wasn't just NOAA, as anybody who's been around here knows, right? The problem was the whole planet was buried in radioactive fallout right away. This was Stanford University, based on 468 hours, based on a very flawed number, by the way. This was the plutonium fallout, based on 20 days. And most concerning was the Neptunium-239 dispersal, based on TEPCO's official numbers. And the problem with the numbers was this 20-day model, and this is Neptunium-239, it decays to plutonium-239 in 2.5 days. There's 10 decays. So every 2.5 days, 50% of it decays. The model is not based, doesn't include the inventories lost from these buildings, and these buildings are still not acknowledged as losing their inventories or melting down or being destroyed. But because you're realistic, and that's why you're here, then you're going to put that into that equation, right? So now the plume after 20 days is much more important. So the food was banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures. They were growing food for sale, and you can tell he doesn't have any kind of protective gear on. Not that the idiotic paper suit can protect you, and that he's right alongside of thousands from the millions of one-ton bags of radioactive fallout that they picked up. And this is in a nuclear wasteland. And so it's for harvest because he's not wearing his idiotic paper suit. So we got real issues going on here. Ignoring these issues is the furthest thing from a solution as you're going to get. That's a typical day for me on the ocean. This is not a typical day because it's usually miserable. right, is usually just a miserable experience. And you're out there for many months at a time because you don't know if you'll ever get the opportunity to go back out there. And so thank goodness that I thought the way I thought and done the things that I done, because otherwise we would never be able to assert with the documentation that this had incredible implications. So, but the reason is because the reason the species disappeared is because nuclear attacks water. It destroys all the life in the water, and then the species stop reproducing. But starfish, for instance, use seawater as blood. And so, this story is important too, that we're just talking about. Taiwan's nuclear waste management is careless. So this is quite a frightening story. To conduct, and so if they're doing it, who else is doing the exact same thing, as I'm going to show you, is a question that you need to consider asking yourself. A visiting nuclear waste management specialist called on Taipower to conduct radioactivity tests on nuclear waste, both before and after incineration. They're incinerating nuclear waste, and you can't destroy nuclear waste through incineration. 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures will not destroy 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures produces it at the nuclear meltdown, for goodness sakes. So how is an incinerator going to destroy it, right? Incineration. He said that the method utilized by Taipower, Taiwan, to incinerate low-level, so-called low-level compared to fuel rods, is still lethal. Radioactive waste were outdated and poorly managed. It's much worse than that. It's the worst nightmare come true for humanity and the species. The purpose of incinerating radioactive waste is to reduce the volume. You don't reduce the isotopes. It's unconscionable they've done that. I mean, my goodness. And so the radioactive fallout around, within 100 miles is going to be brutal. It's brutal. I had 124 views on my video last night. That was an amazing video last night. Incredible information on that show last night. That was a rare. We haven't covered some of that information since 2021, and we haven't covered it before 2021. On top of that, so it's one of those and it's just 2 hours of boom, bang, pow documentation. The purpose of incinerating radioactive waste is to reduce the waste volume. These are every nuclear power plant has incinerators, folks. Everyone worldwide. You have no idea. The reason they're surrounded by farms is to lower the local dose down. And they lower it by poisoning you and your friends and your families and your loved ones. The ultimate betrayal every time you look at nuclear. Using a plasma torch is the common incineration method around the world. It generates temperatures of up to 15,000 degrees Celsius to melt mixed waste material into liquid for storage as high-level radioactive waste. So they don't destroy it; they reduce the volume. This is insidious. It's insidious, but because you can't do that without releasing a huge amount of it. But what's left over is still considered as high-level radioactive waste. Like you liberated it into the environment by using that technique. And then the volume was reduced, so the industry says, well, everything we got can fit into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, which doesn't stand up to any kind of fact-checking whatsoever. If you look at Hanford, the amount they just dumped in the soil during the Manhattan Project, 450 billion gallons, is equal to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Imagine a wall wrapped around the entire planet more than once, splitting atoms in every every atom is splitting atoms, so to speak. I'm sorry, every particle, this is fuel particulates we're talking about. It's like the story is absurd. Imagine what they done at Mayak in the former Soviet Union in Russia, which is still ongoing. And if you look at what France done at the La Hague and their other nuclear reprocessing sites, La Hague got 500 security guards. How are you going to steal something from high-level nuclear anyway? It'll melt your organs in a few seconds. It's to keep you out. It's to harass you if you show up with a Geiger counter or a camera. And La Hague is surrounded by farms for hundreds of miles, it's like 100 square miles. Look it up on a satellite picture. It'll terrify you. All nuclear power plants, if you look at them from a satellite picture, you'll understand why me and the small group that are here are dedicated to educating this planet. So when they melt it down now, it's high-level waste, but it's a smaller volume. It's monstrous. See, they know they're going to release a huge amount at these temperatures. And you're not going to destroy it. You're concentrating it. It's the epitome of evil, just so they can say, allegedly, that they have a small footprint for their waste. They contaminate, each plant will contaminate the entire planet over and over and over every month. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide contaminating your planet, each of them contaminating your entire planet. The inventories, like the models and the studies of radioactive fallout, the numbers that they're using are the same numbers you would get from a fuel pool in 24 hours. And they're calling it a plume. They're not like the models that I'm going to show you in a second, are not based per se as so much on continuous emissions or the total volume of emissions. It's based on venting. And that's the only element on the planet that creates a plume that covers the entire planet and comes in contact with every bird, mammal, animal, insect, and all your water, all your air. I'm almost there, just bear with me. It might take a few more seconds, my apologies. The thing is, I got too much information and everything is so important for me, I don't throw nothing away because I'm like a pack rat of documentation. Here we go. Well, we can just use the Neptunium-239 model, actually. So the Neptunium-239 model is based on the same amount as a fuel pool would release in 24 hours. The fuel pools are full of decades of reactor cores that are splitting atoms. Each reactor core would split atoms to power 1 million homes and businesses, but it's under 1,000 pounds per square inch. Is at 600 or 700 pounds, 600 or 700 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. So once you put it in the fuel pool, it's still splitting the same atoms for 1 million homes and businesses. So each fuel pool could hold easily 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 reactor cores, and typically does, because we don't have a repository anywhere worldwide. And so each fuel pool is producing the same amount of atoms you normally would produce to power millions and millions and millions of homes and businesses every minute. Those atoms are being released directly into the environment through evaporation. The evaporation is caused by the splitting of the atoms and the heat from that. These atoms never go away. So what's going to happen when you release this into your environment constantly for 80 years? Your planet is going to heat up. That energy never goes away. See, when it's producing energy to power 1 million homes and businesses, each reactor, there's 1,000 fuel pools doing this every 24 hours. these models are not based on the actual inventories that were lost at Fukushima. That's the most insane facet to this story that we cover. The models are based on a fraction of venting. They're not. Radiation is because like a gram of man-made fuel has gone through a chain reaction. Say it's a curry. There's 80 curries of cesium per gram. Then, and just let me bring it up actually, because that's kind of important to explain that. Why does a small amount produce such a plume? Right? That's got to bug people sometimes, does it? Oh, let me explain it to you. You're getting lucky tonight. So, a Beck wall is in a disintegration, but it could disintegrate for 1 million years every second. Like, they know so much about radiation, it blows my mind that there's so many evil people on our planet. Okay, so look at this plume here. So this is a 20-day plume of emissions of Neptunium-239 will decay to Plutonium-239 after 2.5 days. So when we talk about cesium, for instance, 137, there's 88 curies per gram. Each curie is 37 billion becquerels. So the plume, you don't need only a pound or two to produce, not even that, right? You just need an ounce or two to produce a plume that covers the planet like that. And a single atom will eventually invoke a tumor and could compromise your immune system. But when you got a plume covering your whole planet, how do you avoid that? Because you can't. So a becquerel is the pulse of energy each second. A curie is 37 billion. So potassium-40, which is often used as a comparison, which has nothing to do with it, which is natural, which is good for you, which is benign and innocuous and harmless, cannot be compared. So naturally occurring so-called radionuclides, which you're acclimated to through genetic superior selection, is equal to 0.00000071 curies per gram, 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram, versus cesium-137 is 88 curies per gram, strontium-90 is 140 curies per gram. So if you got a gram, you're talking about 140, and because strontium-90 is produced at a ratio of 100 to 1 of cesium-137. I'm going to bring up the calculator just so you can see it, because I think it's important. So there's strontium-90 is 37 million atoms per curie. You got to multiply that by 144, was it? 140 is 5 trillion, 180 billion atoms. 5 trillion, 180 billion atoms. And another really interesting thing about the emissions from the fuel pools is in a single day from a single fuel pool, you're producing more anthropogenic man-made harmful atoms than all the grains of sands and all the beaches on the planet and all the stars in the solar system that we acknowledge. Total. So there's 1,000 fuel pools out there with that particular attribute all day, every day. So that's a gram. So Fukushima, each of the reactors lost around 6 million pounds. And that doesn't do it justice. So you got 6 million Yeah, let's do 6 million pounds first. Oh. So you got 6 million times 16 ounces. Because that's pounds we're talking about. You're going to multiply that by 29. Then you're going to multiply that, because that's grams. And so you're going to multiply that by 518000000000000. Did I get that right? Yeah. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 digits. And multiply that by 4. You have 4 reactors. That's enough atoms to poison every species on the planet forever and ever and ever and forever. Should nuclear power plants be declared a menace and imminent threat to the ability of water to sustain life? Because this stuff is a threat to life in many different forms. So the bioaccumulations, so comparing potassium to naturally occurring, which is naturally occurring, harmless, stupid, everyday background, irrelevant emitters that were acclimated to through genetic superior, is 71 millionths of a Curie per gram versus 6 trillion atoms in a single gram of man-made. And then the bioaccumulation up the food chain goes from water to producers, the zooplankton, the small fish, the large fish, the magnification. And you eventually sterilize the water, and the water no longer has the soup of life. And that's where we're at now. 500 days ingestions of 10 atoms per day, a total body activity of 1,400 so-called becquerels. So that's guaranteed that you're going to be an autoimmune triggers going off, because your immune system can no longer fight off the typical harmless and innocuous and benign infections or flus or pathogens or viruses. Bioconcentrations of cesium-137 in the heart, intestines, pancreas, kidneys, livers, all the animals died of when given plutonium, a single exposure to plutonium isotopes, will die of 3 different tumors. Incineration does not reduce the radioactivity of waste, so power companies have to ensure the radioactivity emissions are captured. It does not reduce the radioactivity of waste. That's such a brutal acknowledgement, isn't it? It does not reduce the radioactivity, so power companies, diesel fuel incinerators can reach temperatures of 800 to 1,000 degrees Celsius, and are not capable of melting nuclear waste, leading to the generation of ash and emission of airborne radioactive residue. This is something we warn you about for years and years and years. Are equipped with diesel incinerators commonly used to burn household waste, which means you're going to produce huge particulates of nuclear waste, and you're not reducing the volume, you're just releasing it into the ecosystem. And that's the opposite. That's the opposite of That's the opposite of a good steward, right? That's the complete opposite of something useful. The nuclear waste, which allegedly they were dealing with, safely dealt with, is now weaponized against you. Right? It's used to destroy your biodiversity, your species, your ecosystem, and your water. It's so terrifying That's a terrifying acknowledgement. That's such an important story from back in those days, right? Thank goodness that we got that out there and shared with everybody right now. It's such an important show tonight. And those studies I showed you earlier, that's so important. Well, I appreciate you showing up. Bless your hearts, everybody. I know it can't be easy, and I don't expect people to be able to keep up with me, because I'm prolific. Because I can't rationalize taking a day off, and I always want to take a day off. I've been at this for so long. I don't dream of it or something like that. I love what I'm doing because I understand that that's the only way I can make peace with what my research expeditions have showed me. Because I still can't accept some things, right, that's been done to this planet. Because it's unnecessary to poison every species. And it's sadistic and twisted and demonic, and it's catastrophic now to the ecosystem. That's what our field studies are showing. And I resent that the truth is not allowed to have a conversation, and the lie is shoved down everybody's throat. It's just heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, and it's untenable. We simply can't keep this up. And the evidence we have is uncontestable. It's unassailable documentation. There's nobody can challenge me in a public debate and has even a faint hope of winning, because I only deal with reality, I only deal with the facts, I only deal with the documentation, and I have an absurd amount. And I'm consumed by the truth, because the truth doesn't get a second exposure, right? Less than a gram. That's where we're going to close the show off tonight. Less than a gram. I'm stuck on quite a few of James's songs, which is it's a really good thing. And that helps console me a lot of the times. This is Less Than a Gram. You can find it at his website, James Lucid, on YouTube. You'll find a description below. At the bottom of my, headlines, you'll see a link. You'll see the best nuclear site on the planet. That's the one to go to. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody on the next show. Hopefully tomorrow night. And I always say that because I don't know if I'm going to show up tomorrow night. Because I've been at this for a long, long time, and there's no guarantee, but yet there seems to be a guarantee 5 days a week. No matter how miserable I am, I always seem to find a way. Take care.
Right beside old Unit 3 sits a shell-marked waste, you see. Tanks of resin stacked with care, holding what the pumps caught there. TEPCO field, 2 plans to show. One says yes, the other no. Each awaits a coming call. Neither clears the path at all. So they say, when the work might get underway. Decommission down the line. hopeful sign. 880 tons remain, none retrieved from three's domain. They debate what space to claim. Still the Buildington stays the same. Less than a gram, that's what they've got from Unit 2. A careful